Alrighty, let's try that again. Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining me here today. My name is Abbey and I'm a yogi and Salesforce engineer. Today I'm here to share with you Salesforce conversations, where we can talk about how I view answering questions from trailblazers just like you. So I've looked within the trailblazer community and picked a few questions that I have some perspective on. And I'd like to share with you my thought processes behind how I would answer and address these questions based off my 5 years of experience as being a Salesforce administrator. So thank you so much for joining me here today. I'm really glad to be able to share this perspective with you and gather in community. So the first question that I wanted to look at today is around Experience Cloud. The subject of this is called Hide a Record for Portal Users. The question reads, hello, is there a way to hide case records in the community portal? We have a requirement that some cases, private, should not be visible in the community. Any ideas or workarounds on this? So my first thought when I look at this question is my mind goes straight to profiles. Normally, I would address record visibility on the profile level. So each profile gives a user access to objects, in this case, the case object. But in line 2, it clarifies we have a requirement that some cases are private. So only some cases need to be hidden within the portal. So that means we're not going to be able to leverage our profile visibility because that's applicable to the entire object. So with profiles, we extend or remove access to an object, and then we use sharing rules to modify a certain group of cases to be hidden or visible. So in the case here, we know that we're going to have to be looking at besides my doggies giving their 2 cents, I know that in this case, we'll be looking at a sharing rule or something else because some cases need to be visible by community users while some cases do not. So in this case, I would probably leverage the standard org-wide sharing settings. So org-wide defaults, when you go to Admin 201, that's the first thing they teach you is org-wide defaults. And this is probably where I would apply visibility filters to make some cases not visible by community users. So I would use the standard org-wide sharing model. There's an entire section just for external users. So we have our internal org-wide sharing model that sets our objects to private, where only the object creator or owner can view a record. And normally they're managers within the hierarchy, so my manager via role. Or we can set the objects to public read-only, which gives visibility to the records, but not edit access. And then finally, on our org-wide defaults, we have the option to extend public read-write. So if we wanted everybody to be able to edit every record within that object, we could set the org-wide default to public read-write. Full visibility across the board, which is amazing, but in a lot of cases, we do want to hide some records. So that's when we set our sharing model to private and then share out records based off criteria. So in this case, when I'm looking to make some cases private, I would go down to the case section within our sharing rules. And for the most part, to summarize or make something small, then I would use a sharing rule, probably a private checkbox, in order to extend out access to this particular object. Hi, Panda Express. My stream is about Salesforce. I'm a Salesforce administrator. I develop online databases, and in due time, I hope to share my 5 years of experience with others in the Trailblazer community. So maybe not what you're looking for today, but I do develop online databases in a platform called Salesforce, one of the largest tech companies in the world right now, like $45 billion in revenue, big company. So thanks for stopping by. I'm currently talking about Experience Cloud and how do I share only some cases to my portal users and not all of them. So my answer here is a sharing role, probably creating a checkbox on the case object to make them private. Not too sure what use case we would be leveraging here for needing to make a case private, but in my experience, it's could be things of sensitive nature. Like I worked in financial institutions where we did unfortunately have to log people as deceased over time, right? And close out their bank accounts under their names. So this could be a case in which we'd want to make a case private over time. But whatever the use case would be, I could create a checkbox on the object where we can make it private at any time. And then I would pretty much share out if case private checkbox is not true, then share out all of their cases to all internal users. So by default, we do get a all internal users, all external users, public group. So I normally leverage that in my sharing settings on the case object to share out all but the private cases to all internal users, or in this case, all external users. So that's how I would make some cases private and others visible by our community users. So super fun how we would do that. Or if you want to get really spicy here in community visibility, is that there are something called sharing sets available within Salesforce. So just as I was describing sharing rules as we would extend access within Salesforce to our internal users, sharing sets are sharing models specific to our communities or experiences. So sharing sets, very complex, super kind of nitty-gritty, but I would suggest going to Trailhead. So if you find that the sharing model is not what you're looking for, doesn't answer your use case, sharing sets may be the way to go. Just a more granular community experience specific way to share out our records based off of maybe the company a user is specific to. I only want to share my company's cases with my other company's portal users. So the sharing sets could be a different way to do it. Same kind of concept, just a little different. So how fun in community users sharing our cases to external users. Super fun, lots of where to go. But that leads me to question number 2 that I'm going to be answering today. Question number 2 for me is around custom object hierarchies. The question reads, I have a custom object in which records can be created, but I want to know if in the custom object I can make hierarchies where I have a main record and its child records are seen below. If that of hierarchies can be done, how would it be? Thanks and regards. So this particular question is around custom object hierarchies. In this case, I don't have enough information to be able to give feedback on what is the right approach, as most of these here questions are. But in this case, I do have a few ideas of what we might be able to do to address custom object hierarchies. So my first thought when I looked at this question was, well, maybe this user is referring to the hierarchy visual. So in accounts, there are a custom component for account hierarchies that visually display a pyramid of our records based off their parent to child relationships. So on accounts, we have the parent account and so on and so forth, where we can kind of build on top maybe an org structure, right? I have a shell company with many operating companies underneath of it. So we would use those parent account fields to relate or create a hierarchy between our account records. So translating that into the discussion of custom objects, I don't believe standard there's that same kind of visual representation as we would get on the account hierarchy. Now, many options within the beautiful Trailblazer community of custom components that might be able to give you something similar. So definitely check out those resources on official SF. Many options out there. Give it a Google for custom Lightning web component for hierarchies and see if something wouldn't be available. But I don't believe out of the box we get that same visual representation as we do in account hierarchies for custom objects. I think we'd need to go look for a custom component. One may be out there, but I'm just not sure. But I think worth a look if you haven't before. So my first thought, are we referring to the visual account representation like account hierarchies for custom object? Or the second place in which my mind goes is, are you referring to the relationship between the objects? So the visual hierarchy is really just displaying in a visual way the lookup relationships between the objects. So in Salesforce, we have the two options for lookup relationships, master detail or lookup relationship. When we're looking for a parent-child relationship between these objects, I would normally recommend a master detail relationship, because in this kind of relationship, we can specify what happens when one record is deleted. Say, parent record gets deleted. With a master detail relationship, we can have all of the children deleted at the same time as well. But if there may not be such a specific or rigid relationship between the objects, like in a master detail, we could just use a lookup relationship. But in either of these cases, depending on how you configure it, we get that same feeling of one parent object with many child objects underneath of it. So to me, that's probably where I would go for this particular solution, is I would peruse my different lookup relationships and then maybe do that through one record with a related list for all of its child records. Then we could possibly even match a hierarchy visual on top of that, depending on the type of data. So I just thought this was a really fun question to ponder, because how dynamic are relationships we can make between our objects and our object-based database in Salesforce. Leveraging these, we can really get dynamic, doing all these junction objects between the two, having them roll up. I've had a lot of good fun creating many-to-many relationships, relating custom objects to my standard objects in order to get some of these unique business use cases, like for one, here on Twitch, right? This is not a normal use case that most enterprises would leverage in Salesforce, but here we are. We use Salesforce for everything. So I've created custom objects to hold Twitch episodes and Twitch stream channels, and we can use these object hierarchies and relationships to give us this dynamic view so we can start pulling business insights between how our different pieces of our business interact together. So I thought this was super fun. I did send this user another Trailhead that explains object relationships. So give Trailhead a look on master detail or lookup relationships, and I think that will provide a lot of supplemental information that could support your decision forward on your configuration. I'll now transition to question number 3. In question number 3, it's not really a technical question like my previous 2. I couldn't find a real good one because this week is Dreamforce, so everybody's been a little distracted on Salesforce Plus, or if you were lucky enough to be able to travel to one of the Dreamforce locations, we've all been having our eyes open of what the new announcements in Salesforce is going to be, what their direction forward is going to look like. So we're super excited about the new things coming out. I myself haven't been able to view as many of the Dreamforce sessions as I would like to, but I definitely plan on diving in, so can't wait to see what else has come out. But I picked this last question here today around we're hiring a senior admin can work remotely. So nothing about this particular post that I wanted to comment on. I appreciate this trailblazer for allowing me to use them as an example. But I just wanted to talk for a minute around remote working in the Salesforce industry, what that looks like, what my experience with that has been, because it's definitely changed drastically in the 5 years that I've been working in Salesforce. So I started in the community in 2017, where Salesforce found me. I'd been working at a financial institution and they had decided to implement Salesforce. And I was their first admin. Went from 0 to 1,000 in Salesforce, spending 3 months on Trailhead, learning everything I could about the platform. But at that time, you had to be in the location of your client. I had to go into work every day. Our consultant group that we were working with traveled several hours to be with us in person. So, that was 5 years ago. A lot has changed since then. But it was just really interesting how quickly the remote work caught on within the Salesforce community. I found it a really beautiful opportunity for all of us to break down those barriers and open up opportunities outside of our local area. Because when I started, you had to be there physically. And I was living in small town Indiana, where I knew all 6 people who were doing Salesforce, was creating them faster than they were coming into the environment. So working remotely back then was a treat. You had to be a senior person. You really had to know the right people to find a remote job. While now, everybody in Salesforce is practically remote. There's much more remote work in Salesforce than there is in-person work. And I think that's really great because, I don't have to be restricted within my local area in order to work with other people in Salesforce. I can now Zoom anybody across the globe, and it's amazing to be able to connect with these really brilliant individuals. But what I find is that something we often don't think about when we're working remotely is that, these people can be anywhere in the world. They live drastically different lives than I do. And I'm not too sure that we've changed our thought processes and the way we think about remote work to match that concept. We still kind of think I can treat the people on the other end of the phone the exact way that I would treat all of my neighbors. Hopefully that's with courtesy and kindness. But we can't make these assumptions that you think about the world or the platforms in which we're developing or business models. We don't think about them the same way because we don't live in the same areas. We haven't had those similar experiences that I had when I was in person. When I was in person, I was living in the same community as the people I was working with, going to the same stores, hearing the same news, seeing the same schools. And we had this location of a community that tied us together into a small extent, meaning we grew up in similar ways. We grew up in the local area. We grew up with those similar concepts, so we could make more assumptions around the way people work. We had a more connected idea of how other people were going to view the same problem that we were looking at. But now that we all work remotely and we could come from anywhere in the world, I just want to caution people into taking an extra pause and thinking about how could the person on the other end of this phone be thinking about this situation differently. They're in a lot of different circumstances, have many external factors working on them. And since we are not in the same location anymore, I can't assume what that is. I have to ask. I have to allow that space to be there for others to decide and to interact with us in a particular way. I just want the opportunity for us to talk about how we strategize our interactions with our clients, how we support them through the change management process, how they can leverage the beautiful tool that I'm building for them. And I haven't seen that been done very successfully since transitioning into this remote world and now finding my way into the consulting space in Salesforce. I just find a lot of us out there thinking that things are the same as when I was working for a local company and just working remotely, but now that has changed. We're not just hiring people from my state, we're hiring people all over the globe, and they live so differently from me. They've come to Salesforce in a drastically different way, and it just takes a little bit more effort for us to get to know people, to get to build the trust, to put in the effort to build those deep connections that maybe were easier to build when we had those similar veins of the location in which we lived holding us together. Thank you so much for listening to my spiel on remote work. I'm sure I'll have many other opinions on it as time goes on. Really excited to see how working remotely in Salesforce goes. I think it's going to be a great way because I've revolutionized my life by introducing Salesforce, and I hope that it can do the same for you. So thank you so much for joining me here today. I greatly appreciate you participating in this round of Salesforce conversations, and I can't wait for the next round of questions. Thank you so much for joining me. I will see you next Friday.